Raffaello Santi, or Raphael as he's now better known, was just 25 years old when he began painting this room, the private library of Pope Julius II in the Vatican Palace. The resulting work was so magnificent that it established him as one of the leading artists in Renaissance Rome.
It is this room where Raphael became Raphael, where his career in the Vatican started. When Julius saw the School of Athens, as Vasari says, then he was convinced that was the artist of his time, and he had him decorate the Stanza della Segnatura, i.e. the most important room of his residence, while Michelangelo at the same time was painting the Sistine Chapel, i.e. the spiritual center of the Vatican Palace.
When the young Raphael arrived in Rome in 1508, Michelangelo, 8 years his senior, was already well established and had just started to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. The architect Bramante was in the process of redesigning St. Peter's Basilica. These were strong personalities to contend with, but Raphael rose to the challenge. He went on to receive many more commissions, both from Pope Julius and from other powerful and influential patrons, such as Agostino Chigi, the Pope's banker. Julius's successor, Leo X, would commission Raphael to design a series of tapestries for the walls of the Sistine Chapel and make him Bramante's successor as architect of St. Peter's. Raphael's role in court life meant that he was described by his first biographer, Giorgio Vasari, as living more like a prince than a painter. So where had this precocious young artist come from, who, still in his 20s, had found success in such a competitive environment? Raphael was born at Easter in 1483 in Urbino, a hilltop town northeast of Rome in an area known as the Marches. He grew up here, in this spacious and substantial townhouse, which he later inherited from his father, the painter Giovanni Santi. Santi had his workshop here, and from an early age he gave his son his first drawing lessons. This is a painting by Santi. Its subject of the Virgin and Child is one that would be painted and drawn many times by Raphael. Santi's tender image, the position of the sleeping child in his mother's hands, reminding us of his ultimate sacrifice and the inevitable grief of the Virgin, is typical of the kind of work that the young Raphael would have been surrounded by in his father's workshop. Santi soon identified Raphael's talent, but as a painter at the court of Urbino, he knew that talent alone would not be enough for his son to succeed as an artist. He would also need to acquire the knowledge and cultivation to win favour at court. Raphael absorbed his father's lessons well. He made this self-portrait drawing when he was in his mid-teens, probably not more than 17 years old. Certainly we know that by this age he was named a master painter and had received his first commission, an altarpiece for the church of Sant'Agostino in Città di Castello, a town about a day's ride away from Urbino across the mountains. This altarpiece only survives in fragments, having been badly damaged in an earthquake. Their style shows him to be working in a manner derived directly from his father. Also surviving is Raphael's compositional drawing, one of the very earliest works from his hand. It was, according to Giorgio Vasari, the young artist's fine manners and character that initially impressed the artist Pietro Perugino, who he would have first encountered in Perugia. Perugino was a highly successful painter of frescoes, portraits and altarpieces, with workshops in both Perugia and Florence. He worked for many of the most discerning and demanding patrons of the time, and Vasari tells us that Raphael became his apprentice. Vasari's information, however, is often unreliable, and there is no documentary evidence for this, but there certainly was a significant connection between the two painters, and Raphael was to learn much from the older artist. These frescoes in the Cambio, or money exchange in Perugia, are typical of Perugino's work. The landscape background, leading the eye by stages towards the horizon, is typical. It was a style of painting that brought him much success. Dainty, somewhat weightless figures are arranged across the front of the composition in one simple plane. pretty hands and feet, sweet expressions and decorative colours are all characteristic of the artist.
Raphael would surely have passed through these hills travelling from Urbino to Perugia, and it's clear that his depiction of landscape was greatly influenced both by his observation of nature and his study from perhaps one of the great exponents of landscape painting, Pietro Perugino.
As well as immersing himself in Perugino, Raphael also got to know Perugia's other leading painter of the time, Pinturicchio. In 1502, still not yet 20 years old, Raphael was invited to Siena to work with Pinturicchio on the designs for these frescoes in the Piccolomini library. Raphael's principal talents were his remarkable draftsmanship and his ability to create complex figure compositions. This had been very evident to his father, and the fact that Pinturicchio invited him at such a young age to produce the designs for his frescoes in Siena indicates how quickly he developed. His youthful fame was resulting in great opportunities. Pinturicchio was unable to replicate Raphael's elegant compositions. Compared to Raphael's designs, his frescoes are flatly drawn, garishly coloured, and here, for example, he ruins the balance of the composition, including a greyhound in a place which Raphael had carefully left empty to give space around the figure group. In his own paintings, it is evident that the young Raphael is leaving Pinturicchio behind. When we compare an early painting by Raphael of the Virgin and Child with a version of the same subject by Pinturicchio, we can see that Raphael gives his characters greater emotional expression. And while Raphael's figures appear firmly rooted in space, Pinturicchio's seem two-dimensional by comparison. Raphael's keen intelligence is clear in his earliest works. In these drawings for a painting showing Christ's resurrection, he makes individual studies of figures to experiment with their poses. Raphael was acutely aware of the importance of the pose and expression of individual figures in making believable compositions. In these banners, made when he was about 19 years old, which the people of Città di Castello carried through the streets during religious processions in the 16th century, there are enough areas left relatively undamaged to see that the flesh of the faces is painted very delicately. Comparing the angels in his banner for Città di Castello and the angels in this altarpiece, painted just a year or two later, we see how he has made them more graceful and ethereal. And the design is geometrically planned, made up of a series of arcs which echo the arched top. You can trace these in the lines created by the angels' feet and by the tops of the heads of the figures below the cross. This altarpiece was made in 1503, before Raphael had assimilated the influence of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. However, he has thoroughly absorbed the lessons of Perugino, to the extent that Vasari said that if the picture was not signed, it would be easy to mistake it for a Perugino. Vasari was very impressed at the speed with which Raphael had absorbed Perugino's style, and tells us that he was able to do it in only a few months. Raphael was evidently impressed by Perugino's expressive range, his ability to convey religious sentiment, and in the young Raphael we see the same sweet angelic look. He also copies the fragile physique of Perugino's figures, and even some quirky details: small, pursed, Cupid's bow lips, and delicately arched little fingers. The way the tones in the landscape pale toward the horizon, creating believable distance, is again something he has borrowed from Perugino. And from Perugino's miniaturist work, he started to appreciate how the careful depiction of details could help to convey an overall sense of naturalism. This tiny painting of Raphael's is a good example. A sleeping knight is confronted in a dream by two figures who represent two different choices. He can either follow a life of pleasure, here symbolized by the elegant woman with a flower who stands before a calm and placid landscape, or he can follow a life of virtue, symbolized